This morning, we continue our series on the fruit of the Spirit, and today we have a 2-for-1 offer. We'll take a bite out of both peace and patience and learn how each of these varietals increases the growth of the other. In farming and gardening, there's a concept known as cross-pollination. Perhaps you remember this from middle school science. My memory wasn't as great, so I needed a little refresher, and thankfully YouTube is a quick tutor. So here you go. Here's your refresher on cross-pollination. Some types of fruit trees, such as apple, pear, or plum, require 2 trees of different varieties if you want to get fruit. Tree A and tree B need to be cross-pollinated by bees in order to produce more fruit. So, of course, you could plant just one apple tree in your yard. That would be lovely, and you might get some little apples there. But if you plant 2 apple trees of different kinds, you will get more and higher quality apples. So let's say you plant a Fuji apple tree and a Granny Smith apple tree, and then the bees do their work to pollinate those. You will have good fruit from both of those trees. And that seems to me how the Holy Spirit works to produce the fruit of peace and patience in our lives. When we grow patience, we grow peace. And when we become more peaceful within ourselves and with others, we tend to be more patient too. This connection between peace and patience isn't just limited to the Christian realm. After a quick internet search, I found several articles from the fields of psychology and mindfulness on this same topic. Here are some of the titles. The Golden Rule of Patience, Nurturing Peace and Understanding. Why patience is key to happiness and a sense of peace. Patience equals peace of mind. Patience, a pathway to peace. In our busy, hurried world, it seems the peace we long for in our daily lives and even in our immediate relationships is intricately related to patience. Thankfully, we don't need to rely on our own willpower or inner strength to grow this fruit in our lives. Instead, peace and patience grow in us when we depend on the power of God's Holy Spirit. In this story about Jesus from Luke chapter 8, we didn't exactly hear the word patience, but we should be able to recognize patience in action. Jesus had just been welcomed into town by a good-sized crowd when Jairus, a synagogue leader, a member of the Jewish ruling class, came to him begging for help. His 12-year-old daughter was so sick that Luke tells us she was dying. Jesus and the growing crowd began to move toward Jairus' home, and I imagine they began moving pretty quickly. This was an emergency. They had somewhere very important to be, something very important to do. Someone very important needed help. So they hurried along until suddenly Jesus stopped. Who touched me? He wanted to know. Peter, ever ready to speak up for the group, questioned Jesus' social awareness in that moment, identifying the very large crowd pressing in. What do you mean, who touched me? Like literally everybody is touching you right now. But Jesus had felt something different, and he wasn't going to ignore it. Finally, a woman courageously stepped forward, confessing that she had been the one to touch Jesus' clothes. Then she told Jesus and everyone in that great big crowd who happened to be listening her very personal story. She'd had a medical condition for 12 years that resulted in her exclusion from Jewish religious life, marriage, and childbearing. This illness had financially ruined her. She had spent every last penny in hopes of finding a cure. She had no status, and there was no one there to defend her. She was so unimportant in her community that we don't even know her name. Alone, destitute, socially outcast, chronically ill, and ritually impure, she was at the bottom of the social scale. This had been her condition for 12 long years. 12 years. of doctor's visits, medicinal treatments, unrealized hopes, loneliness, shame, rejection, physical pain, inconvenience, financial loss, frustration, sorrow, and unanswered questions. If you have lived with a chronic illness or had to change doctors or therapists while navigating a significant problem, you know how much time and energy it takes to tell your story over and over again. But that's just what this woman did. And Jesus stopped long enough to listen. Interrupted from his mission to save the daughter of a prominent community member, with proud crowds pressing and hurrying him along, Jesus seemed to have all the time in the world to give his full attention to a no-name, no-count, nobody. Jesus was not anxious about getting somewhere on time. He was not wound up about where he needed to be or what he needed to do next. Jesus was patient. And because he was patient, because he took the time to look this woman in her eyes and with the tender love of God, honor her in public by calling her daughter, she not only received physical healing, she experienced peace. Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Patience led to peace. I imagine the folks in that crowd, and especially Jairus, were not feeling quite as patient as Jesus that day. Someone really important was waiting for help, his daughter's life hanging in the balance. Jairus was a prominent, contributing member of society, and this random woman was interrupting everything. Plus, she had already been dealing with her problem for 12 years. Couldn't she wait a little longer? What was it that motivated Jesus to stop what he was doing to talk to her? She had already reached out and gotten what she wanted. She could have crept out of the crowd as easily as she had crept in. She could have gone on her way healed and happy, and Jesus could have just kept moving. But if he had done that, if he had hurried on to a more important appointment, a life-changing encounter would have been missed. Because beyond just healing her physical problem, Jesus healed her socially by acknowledging her presence, by naming her daughter, identifying her as someone who belonged, someone who mattered. Jesus healed her spiritually by affirming her faith and wholeness before God. He healed her heart and mind by making it possible for her to be restored to family and community and to live in wellness and peace. What a beautiful encounter. But what about Jairus? Jesus was held up just long enough that Jairus' little girl didn't make it. But thanks be to God, we know the rest of the story. Although Jesus arrived later than anticipated, the power of God has always been stronger than the power of death. And Jairus and his wife got their little girl back. Another daughter restored to life, community, wholeness, and health. One miracle became ever linked to the other as two daughters were touched by the patience of Jesus. Without hurry, without anxiety, without prejudice, Jesus brought peace to two people on both ends of the social spectrum. Whether rich or poor, powerful or outcast, Jesus demonstrates that every person is worthy of love, mercy, and patient attention. Now, it's funny that I should be up here preaching about patience because the truth is, I have been a notoriously impatient person. Just ask my children. And when I told them I was preaching on this today, they both laughed. Impatience has been a chronic problem in my life. Most of that impatience has been fueled by anxiety because I'm so afraid of not being on time or not having what I need, or not being able to do what I set out to do. But the way that my anxious impatience affects me physically and mentally, it snowballs back on me, increasing my anxiety even more. It's a vicious cycle. Anxiety and impatience, sinister partners in a terrible kind of cross-pollination. While my impatience shows up in just about every area of my life, I have to confess that it has been terribly evident in my driving. Anybody else want to be honest with me up in here? Okay, I see those hands. All right. Now, I generally take advantage of my morning commute as a time for prayer. I pray for myself and for others, for my ministry, and for you all. But I also have a bad habit of speeding, driving aggressively, nearly pushing other cars out of my way. And one day it occurred to me that the same breath I was using to pray good things for others was also being used to shout terrible things at other drivers. My words would move seamlessly from prayers for peace and blessing to, would you please go? Get out of this lane. What are you doing? The Holy Spirit convicted me on this, and I knew something had to change. And so I began the spiritual work of controlling my speed. Why was this spiritual work, you might ask? Because I knew that my impatient, aggressive driving was rooted in self-centeredness and pride. Racing to my destination faster and unimpeded had become more important than showing courtesy to others. Prioritizing my schedule and my needs is an act of pride that assumes what I am doing is more important than anyone else who might get in my way. This was absolutely a spiritual problem. And so I decided to slow down. And it was hard at first to submit to driving in that right-hand lane with the other slowpokes. I didn't love the feeling of other cars zipping by me, but I prayed for help, and I used cruise control as a means of discipline. Within just a few days, I was experiencing a much more peaceful drive to work. Rather than competing and racing and fussing and sometimes cussing, I learned to be content with the speed limit. I realized that all that worry about getting around faster was only causing more chaos in my mind and body, robbing me of peace. And it turns out all that zooming and zigzagging wasn't making my commute any shorter, but it was making me frustrated and short-tempered. Now, most days I arrive at work feeling calmer and more peaceful, and I think that is a nice gift for my coworkers. Now, this example might seem silly to share, but honestly, this has been a revolutionary change for me. Allowing the Holy Spirit to get to work, cultivating the fruit of patience, has also produced greater peace in my life, and not just behind the wheel. Experiencing the satisfying fruit of patience has helped me to identify the disgusting fruit of impatience and self-centeredness that have robbed me and those around me of life-giving peace. I see this ugly truth in myself when people don't move as quickly as I'd like. When the needs of others push my needs or wants to the back of the line. When I view my agenda as more important than yours. When I allow anxiety to manifest itself by lashing out on the people I love the most. Impatience steals my peace and yours. Perhaps you can identify areas of your life where impatience is robbing you of peace. Does anxiety have you hurrying throughout your day, causing you to dismiss the needs of others? Is pride? Does your impatient attitude cause you to bristle and fume and huff and puff at others around you, pressuring them to catch up and keep up? Is your quest to be on time, to be first, to be faster, to finish sooner, making you look more like the Tasmanian devil from Looney Tunes than like Jesus? My answer to all of these questions is still yes. I'm a work in progress, just like all of us, but I'm learning to allow space and time for the Holy Spirit to work these things out. And there are small blossoms growing that hold the promise of real fruit, patience and peace that enrich my life and the lives of those around me. How about you? Will you cooperate with the Holy Spirit to grow patience in your life? Will you allow God to change your attitudes of self-centeredness or pride? Will you follow the example of Jesus being patient with life's interruptions? Because these patient places are fertile ground for peace to grow and nourish our world.